Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. Okay, so I know people are really stressed out about everything that's going on. And for those of you who don't know what's going on, let me just read to you what President Donald Trump has said. He's been building up to the idea of um, an all out attack on Iran because he started a war with Iran on February 28th, apparently unaware that that Iran could could strike the other Gulf states in the region and could close the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil comes, a little bit more than that of liquid natural gas and things like fertilizers, as well as other products. So he's been trying to force Iran to open up that strait by bombing the country and basically saying, we have control over everything. We won. And then, simply in order to keep the strait closed, all Iran has to do is sort of threaten to launch a drone or something at any kind of these incredibly expensive tankers that go through it. So it's one of those cases where you can have all the most powerful military in the world, but all it takes is a little bit of effort to block that strait. And this is clearly making him more and more unstable and more uh, um, mentally fragile. Let's put it that way. All right. So he's been saying a lot of outrageous stuff that I've been writing about. And this morning, he posted this on social media. And I quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran." All right. Well, you don't have to look very far to see that as a threat to use nuclear weapons against Iran, and that's exactly how it has been taken around the world, really. But before you really panic over what he is saying, which is extraordinarily grave. Just I'm going to come back to that. Um, do recognize that there are some interesting elements in this that point to more to where Trump is than where Iran and the rest of the world is. So first of all, here, a civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Clearly, he is threatening Iran. I would also suggest at some level he is threatening the United States. If in fact the United States destroys another country in what is a war of choice, we will never be the same again. Like, so Iran won't be, but we will not be either. And that's going to be important to remember as I talk today. And then he says, I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. Okay, so he's kind of washing his hands there of responsibility, even though he is solely responsible for this. And then he says this: however, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? All right, to be clear, the same regime that was in charge of Iran before Trump bombed it is still in charge. What's happened is many of the leaders, especially the much older Ayatollah, was killed in the initial strike, and some of the other leaders have been killed. They've actually been replaced with people who are more hardline than they were. And they have cracked down more thoroughly on the Iranian people than they were doing already in February of 2026. But this is a little bit of wiggle room here for Trump, saying, oh, because there hasn't been regime change, but be saying, because there has been regime change, I might be able to work with these people. So you can hear there the echo of this is just a threat, right? And then he goes on to say, we will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. This is a TV guy. who wants everybody's attention on him, and that's exactly what he has gotten with this series of threats. And then he has his usual, sort of over the top closing, and then, God bless the great people of Iran. Now, a lot of things going on here, but let me start. I'm a little bit in a number of places myself here, but let me start with the obvious and important piece here, and that's that the president of the United States is incapable of fulfilling his job. He is in serious mental trouble. He is deteriorating. And, I know some of you are probably here hoping I'm going to tell you that this is all a bluff and he's not going to do anything. No, the bottom line is we don't know what he's going to do because he is completely unhinged. And this has never happened before in the United States of America. We certainly have had presidents who are not functioning at the best of their ability. And there are a number of people in the radical right who are trying to say, oh, he's just trying to be like Nixon and do the mad dog theory of international relations. And what that is something that comes from something Nixon said when he was negotiating, or his people were negotiating to end the Vietnam War, is he would say to them, tell them that you're frightened of me and you don't know what I'm going to do. And that'll give us more negotiating power. But this is not at all parallel in the sense that while Nixon was, in fact, trying to play the kind of crazy guy, and Nixon had his moments, let me tell you, he also had really sophisticated diplomats doing the actual work. In this case, Trump is not using diplomats. He is using his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to try and wrest some kind of what certainly seems to be business deals out of this attack on Iran. And they're simply not equipped to be diplomats. And in fact, there have been a couple of wonderful studies coming out of the diplomatic attempts that led to Trump bombing Iran that said that essentially what happened there was that Witkoff and Kushner misunderstood the language of diplomacy and didn't recognize what was actually going on there. And one of the things that's really interesting about diplomacy, as you remember, is that diplomats have to speak both for consumption at home and for moving the ball forward in international affairs. And that's a really tricky thing to do. So there are diplomatic ways in which one says things. And I don't just mean diplomatic in sort of the euphemistic way, like, oh, he's being diplomatic. No, there really are diplomatic ways to say things so that you can convey an impression without losing support on the home front or causing trouble in the international front. And Witkoff and Kushner clearly have absolutely no idea of any of this. They think they can just simply go through and throw their business weight around, and that's going to be enough. And of course, what that meant was that when they went home and told Trump what they were saying to the Iranians, they felt that the Iranians had not been negotiating fairly. And this is why Trump then went ahead and appears to have thought he could have a really quick attack on Iran that would look a great deal like Venezuela, and he would get maybe a bump in the polls and maybe some control of some oil, and this would all be great. And that's, of course, not what happened. All right. So in this moment, I can't tell you that Trump is not, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't think he knows what he's going to do. But we do have some things to go on that we can observe in this moment that tell us some things about what tomorrow is going to look like. So first of all, please don't lose sight of the fact that the Vice President of the United States is not in the United States. The Vice President of the United States is in Hungary. Now, if the United States of America were going to attack a foreign country with nuclear weapons, the Vice President of the United States should be in a secure location in the United States of America. Now, again, I'm not saying that anybody knows what Trump is going to do, but I am telling you that the fact that the Vice President of the United States is not here is significant. So why isn't J.D. Vance here? It's also significant. J.D. Vance is in Hungary because the leader of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who is the right-wing leader who has overturned the democracy that was Hungary and put in place his own authoritarian regime, is up for election, and he's so far underwater, he and his people are afraid he's not going to win. Now, today, one of the things that happened is a newspaper broke the story of a number of, I believe it was emails from Orban to Putin, or a series of messages in which he emphasized that he would do anything that the president, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, wanted him to do. He is Putin's lapdog. Now, think about what that does to American politics in this moment. The United States of America, the government of the United States of America, literally has our second most powerful leader in Hungary right now, trying to prop up somebody who is now fully visible as Putin's lackey. This is a problem, of course, for Viktor Orban. It's also a real problem for the administration. All of us for a long time have been saying, there's something with Trump and Putin. Now we literally have that direct connection established as of today. Now, in addition to that, why is it important for Trump and Vance in the United States to have Orban win? The radical right in the United States has really doubled down on Orban and of the Orban's movement in Hungary, because they believe in its white supremacy. They believe in its rejection of immigration. They believe in its getting rid of women's rights and getting rid of healthcare rights and reproductive rights, and pushing women and people of color into a subordinate position to white Christian men. They believe all that stuff. But if Orban is not reelected, and there have been all kinds of machinations to try and make sure he does get reelected. In fact, at one point there was a plot to fake an assassination attempt on him because they thought that would bump his numbers in the polls and make people turn from worrying about what he was doing in Hungary, but then to worry about national security, so that would give him a real bump in the polls. If Orban loses, what that says to the radical right in the United States is that what they have been believing, that they were on a mission backed by God that was only going to be moving in one direction as they took over these countries one by one, including the United States of America, has taken a real step back. Because obviously, if Orban doesn't stay in power, he was one of the harbingers of this what's supposed to be this juggernaut taking over the world, right? So you can see the real fear on the part of MAGA Republicans, especially Trump Republicans, that this movement is falling apart. And you can also see it at home, where MAGA is profoundly split over the issue of Iran, and on the fact that Trump is underwater. At this point, the numbers came out this morning from G. Elliott Morris of Strength in Numbers, that Trump is underwater in 135 congressional districts, which does not bode well for November, right? So you add these things up, and what you have is a president who was already not mentally acute, and who has clearly issues with his brain power these days, who is under enormous stress, who is losing popularity. And this is a man who has never been able to stand losing popularity, and who has lost all the people who bailed him out of trouble in the past. So, there was always someone there to bail him out. And in this case, he got into trouble in Iran, and then he turned to NATO and said, "Save me over here." And NATO was like, "Thanks, but we're a defensive organization and we had nothing to say about this." And he's been trying to force people to come help him. And they're all like, "Nah, we're pretty good over here." And so now he is backed into a corner. And this is what you are seeing, is this lashing out of, okay, if no one's going to help me, I'm just going to burn it all down. And I think one of the reasons that people are feeling as uncomfortable as they are right now in the United States is that many of us recognize this dynamic, right? You've got here, he has been abusing the American people now for a while. And the American people are standing up to him and saying, "No, we're not gonna go along with the things that you are ordering. We don't like you." We came out for No Kings last Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago. And he recognizes this, and in that kind of an of abusive mindset that he's got, if you can't have it, you're going to kill it, right? The flip side of that in this moment is that when the people push back and say, that's not the way this is going to go, we are reclaiming our power, they wake up and they discover they're really, really strong. And this is a moment in which when Trump said this a civilization is going to end, what has ended today, no matter what happens for the rest of tonight or for the rest of history, is that Trump can never go back to where he was before today. You can't go back to, oh, never mind, I was having a bad day, if you have just threatened to annihilate another country. There's no coming back from this. Something has to change going forward. And the person who is weakest in this moment, ironically, is Trump. Think about what tomorrow looks like, regardless of what Trump does. Is he going to get more people enthusiastic about him after today? Absolutely not. This is not a case of a misunderstanding between countries, like or of new technologies that nobody knows how to deal with, like we had with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. This is just one guy who's, you've heard me say it, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And there's no way to come back from that. So you've asked a number of things about what can people do? Like people are clearly panicked, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a second. What about the 25th Amendment? Okay, you asked me how the 25th Amendment works. So I pulled this up. The 25th Amendment, I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little bit, wax a little historical here. The 25th Amendment fascinates me because people associate it with the 1960s after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, because that's really when people started discussing it in Congress and pushing forward with it. But in fact, the 25th Amendment was the brainchild of Dwight Eisenhower, who was the Republican president who's elected in 52 and takes office in 53. And he came from the military. And the reason that he wanted the 25th is partly because he was sometimes in ill health. And at one point he underwent an operation, and he wanted there to be a smooth process for a vice president or someone else to take power if something happened to him when he was under anesthesia, for example. So he recognized that was an issue. But even more than that was the fact that during the First World War, he had watched a military leader become mentally fatigued and make bad mistakes that led to people's deaths. And the guy didn't know what was happening. And by the way, this is happening, I think, at least to me. I am so overtired, and I think many other people feel the same, that I make stupid mistakes. Fortunately, I'm not in a position where my stupid mistakes lead to people's deaths, but Eisenhower saw it and recognized that sometimes people are not aware that they are not operating at the best of their ability. And there must be a system in place, especially because of nuclear weapons, for a president to be removed if he needed to be for one reason or another. And that's why we have the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It does a number of other things too. It officially makes the vice president become the president, and it has a system for getting a new vice president if the vice president has moved up to president. We have, I'm not going to talk to you about that stuff today. But the whole reason I gave you that wind up is, first of all, because it's interesting. A true leader, I think, like Eisenhower, recognizes that they need to have contingencies in place for their own incapacity. Of course, this is not something that the modern day Republicans are talking about, and I'll get there in a second. But anyway, because of that, the system is long and complicated. So let me read to you how it works. This is the 25th Amendment to the United States. And Section 3 says, if the president says to the Congress, I can't do this anymore, I'm unable to discharge the powers and duties of my office, he has to submit that declaration in writing to the head of the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, and then he can rescind that in writing afterward. But That's section 3. Well, I don't think we're looking at that going to happen. The section that you're interested in is section 4, and it's complicated. So listen. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments, that's the cabinet, or of such other body as Congress may by law provide. Okay, so either a majority of the cabinet and the vice president, or Congress can say we're going to create our own body to examine the mental health of the president, for example. Not a quick process. Whenever a majority of those, one of those two things, transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. And acting, means it's not official yet. Thereafter, when the President transmits to those same leaders of the House and Senate, the Senate pro tem and the Speaker of the House, his written declaration that no inability exists, he gets to be president again. He shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless, once again, the vice president and a majority of either the cabinet or other such body as Congress provides says within 4 days to those same leaders, the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, their written declaration that no, in fact, he's not okay. I'm modernizing the language here. Thereupon, the issue goes to Congress. Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose if it's not in session. And if the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if you don't need all these dates, determines by a 2/3 vote of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president will continue to be the acting president, or if that doesn't happen, the president becomes president again. Okay. That's not a really easy or quick system, and it was obviously not designed for a system in which one party has given up the idea of putting the country before the party. Because what's happened today is, while people around the world are completely freaking out over Trump's declaration, most of the Republicans in Congress have said absolutely nothing. The Democrats in Congress are calling for the 25th Amendment, but the Republicans in Congress, who, remember, have a majority of both the House and the Senate, and both the House and the Senate are not, they're in session right now. It's a weird wording thing, but they're not actually in Washington. That is the big picture session is still happening, but they're not due to come back into Washington, D.C. to talk about stuff until next week, until next Monday. There's no doubt that Trump did this in part because they're not here. So the Republicans who could actually do something about this, because only the House of the minority leader of the Senate, John Thune, who's a Republican of South Dakota, the majority leader of the Senate, John Thune, is a Republican of South Dakota, or the Speaker of the House in the House, who is Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana. They're the only two people who can call their chambers back into session, or back into doing work. And they're not. Have you seen anything from them today? No, but they're not saying anything. So what you've got here is the Republican Party simply refusing to do anything at all about the fact that their president is completely unhinged. And I think the lesson you have to take from that is they agree with him that this is something they should go ahead and do. Now, I actually don't believe that all of them think that. I think they are hoping somebody else will take care of this problem. But anybody who has taken an oath of office to the Constitution and is refusing to do anything in this moment has abdicated any claim at all to any benefit of the doubt or anything. Every member of Congress, Democrats as well, by the way, should be clamoring right now for J.D. Vance to take over from Donald Trump, because what Trump has done here is such a complete rejection of everything that American democracy should stand for and that the UN stood for, and all the things that we have put in place to make sure mad kings did not destroy our globe, is being torn up before our eyes. And those people who vowed to protect our Constitution and us and aren't doing that, to me, have just simply abdicated their right to have anything other than to be associated with Trump and what he's been doing all along. All right, but if Congress isn't going to invoke the 25th, hoping, of course, that he's going to back out, which he might. It is Taco Tuesday, after all. Trump always chickens out, and it's a Tuesday, and he gave himself wiggle room, and J.D. Vance isn't here, and he doesn't like taking responsibility for anything. Did you ever notice that? He doesn't ever fire anybody himself in person. He does it over a tweet, or he gets someone else to do it. Despite all of those things, there are things Congress can do that would mitigate where we are right now. So, for example, the Congress could come back into Washington and stop him from using the, and invoke the war powers and say, you had no right to do this. You're at war. You can't do this. And we are going to stop you from doing this. They could even more powerfully go to Trump and say, especially the Republican senators, as Republican senators went to Richard Nixon in 1974 and say, you're done. We won't support anything you do. No nominees, no legislation. We will be out there. We're going to investigate you. We're going to impeach you unless you resign this moment, or maybe even if you resign this moment. They could do that, and they are not doing it. So there are ways that members of Congress could step up if they wanted to, but they are clearly not. So where does that leave us in this moment? First of all, we don't know what's going to happen. And Trump wants us to be sitting here sweating bullets and crying and doing whatever because he's a showman. He loves that everyone's paying attention to him. And, this is his happy place. Tomorrow is going to come no matter what happens tonight. And the next day is going to come after that. And the next day is going to come after that. And whatever world that we wake up to tomorrow, whether Trump does the unthinkable or whether he says, everybody praise me and give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I stopped the attack on Iran. We don't know what he's going to do. Regardless, though, tomorrow is the first day of Trump's got to go now. This is completely unacceptable behavior. And it's the first day of we're rebuilding American democracy, because it's not just Trump at this point. It is the entire anti-democratic movement of the MAGA Republicans who has brought us to this moment and who are hanging us out over the cliff with their president. All of them have got to be voted out, pushed off of our national stage. And, those of you who are listening to me who are Republicans, take back your party. Stand up and say this is not what the Republican Party is supposed to stand for. And those of us who are interested in protecting American democracy have to recognize that this is now, the world just changed. In the last week, this world has changed. I did tell you the spring was going to be bad, didn't I? And I did tell you we were going to have a crisis before May, and here we are. Everything has changed in this moment because of the behavior of this one man and the unwillingness of Republican leaders to push back against him. And the vast majority of Americans, even if they have R's by their names or whatever, they don't want this. It is time for us to take this country back and refuse to put up with this sort of terrorism against us, which is really what you're seeing right now. And remember as well, I don't mean to denigrate what he has already done, by the way, to Iran, not what he's threatening to do, what he has already done to Iran. But we have to take this as enough is a freak enough. If you think about it, think of it in the terms of something like the Great Crash of 29, where, after the Great Crash, Herbert Hoover was never going to have another chance at gaining power in the United States of America. Or after, the firing on Fort Sumter, which is coming up, by the way, the anniversary of. Think of this moment as something like that, where there is no going back to the time before it. But that doesn't mean that we have to put up with the idea of being subordinate to a crazy man, because that's where we are right now. So, so what can you do? First of all, there's nothing that you and I can do about Donald Trump tonight. There's just nothing we can do. He's going to do whatever he's going to do. But what you can do is you can call your electeds right now. You can be on social media. You can yell about this, not as in, I'm terrified of what's going to happen. We all are terrified of what's going to happen. But as in, I'm not going to put up with this. This is my country. The idea that this man is threatening to destroy a civilization, like, what are we talking about here? This is completely unacceptable. And the trick is, of course, that the vast majority of Americans agree with you. So now is the time absolutely to speak up. But, and again, somebody said, I can't take any more of this. If you decide tonight to watch a trashy movie or to read a book or to bake or to clean your bathroom, like, the world's going to keep turning. It's okay to look away from this. Where it's not going to be okay to look away is when we get to the other side and we have to rebuild. Then we're going to need your clean bathroom, and we're going to need your knowledge that you got from the book, and we're going to need all that stuff to know what we're going to do next. So I would love to tell you that this is all bluster and he's going to look away, and maybe he is. This is very typical of Trump. Or maybe he is so backed into the corner and so aware of his own failing that he is going to lash out and he's going to hurt as many people as he can. And one of the ways he could do that is through, and by the way, just to be clear, one of the things that Trump did in his first administration was to develop tactical nuclear weapons, which are much weaker than those of you who are thinking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example. They're much weaker than that. So that they're still horrific. And if he did that, it would open up a whole Pandora's box that we all don't want to be in, I promise you. But if you have truly, end of the world kinds of visions happening, I don't think that's what he's putting on the table here. And by the way, conventional weapons and what we call conventional weapons are also horrific things. It's not, there's a lot here of damage and pain that he could inflict on people because he is an emotional child who has, by the American voters, gotten power to wreak havoc on the globe. So if he decided to do the unthinkable, again, tomorrow's going to come and we're going to have to figure out what it looks like at that point when we reclaim American democracy and when we help the rest of the world rebuild and guarantee that this sort of government run amok, whether from a former democracy, whether from an authoritarian government, whether from a religious government, whatever, can never happen again. And the huge irony of this, of course, is that the man who did the most in the United States to try and make sure this could never happen again, well, one of the men, I shouldn't say the most because certainly FDR helped, but was a Republican, was Dwight Eisenhower, who was keenly aware of the power of nuclear weapons and how incredibly important it was going to be to make sure that people had a rising standard of living so that they did not get sucked in by authoritarians of the religious or the political kind who would get them to back him because he would make them feel better about themselves and make them feel like they could be important and powerful again. And with the power they gave him, use a nuclear weapon. So here we are with this bizarre echo of a Republican president who recognized the very dangers that his own party would give to the world, 80 years later. So there we are. If I will, I'm actually, I'm taking the night off because, why not? So I'm going to go out for a little bit. And if whatever happens, if it is something that makes you feel like I should be live, I will go live. But at least now, again, the future is unwritten. We don't know what he's going to do. And maybe it will be tune in next week. Pakistan is already trying to get a 2-week extension. Tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Donald Trump Show. But I, for one, am done with the Donald Trump show. I am all about this becoming the show for the American people for the rest of my lifetime. And I'm proud and pleased to be doing it alongside you all. And by God, it's time to build that movement and stop the madness and take this country back. Thank you for being here. And as I say, I'll come back if you feel like if something unthinkable happens. But until that does, I am proceeding as if this is Trump being a showman, and that we simply have to move him off the national and the international stage. Thanks for being here. And you know what? We're doing it together. And please keep the faith and be kind to yourselves under the stress we're under. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.